welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. The Knights of the Joyous Venture. Harp Song of the Dane Women. What is a woman that you forsake her, and the hearth fire and the homemaker, to go with the old grey widow-maker? She has no house to lay a guest in, but one chill bed for all to rest in, that the pale suns and the stray birds nest in. She has no strong white arms to fold you, but the 10 times fingering weed to hold you bound on the rocks where the tide has rolled you. Yet when the signs of summer thicken and the ice breaks and the birch buds quicken, yearly you turn from our side and sicken again for the shouts and the slaughters. You steal away to the lapping waters and look at your ship in her winter quarters. You forget our mirth and talk at the tables, the kine in the shed and the horse in the stables, to pitch her sides and go over her cables. Then you drive out where the storm clouds swallow, and the sound of your oar blades falling hollow is all we have left through the months to follow. Ah, what is a woman that you forsake her, and the hearth fires and the home acre, to go with the old grey widow-maker? It was too hot to run about in the open, so Dan asked their friend old Hobden to take their own dinghy from the pond and put her on the brook at the bottom of the garden. Her painted name was the Daisy, but for long exploring expeditions she was the Golden Hind, or the Long Serpent, or some such suitable name. Dan hiked and howked with the boat hook. The brook was too narrow for sculls, and Una punted with a piece of hop pole. When they came to a very shallow place, the Golden Hind drew quite 3 inches of water, they disembarked and scuffled her over the gravel by her tow rope. And when they reached the overgrown banks beyond the garden, they pulled themselves upstream by the low branches. That day they intended to discover the North Cape, like O'Tear the old sea captain in the book of verses which Una had brought with her. But on account of the heat, they changed it to a voyage up the Amazon and the sources of the Nile. Even on the shaded water, the air was hot and heavy with drowsy scents, while outside, through breaks in the trees, the sunshine burned the pasture like fire. The kingfisher was asleep on his watching branch, and the blackbirds scarcely took the trouble to dive to the next bush. Dragonflies wheeling and clashing were the only things at work, except the moorhens and a big red admiral who flapped down out of the sunshine for a drink. When they reached Otter Pool, the Golden Hind grounded comfortably on a shallow, and they lay beneath a roof of close green, watching the water trickle over the floodgates down the mossy brick chute from the mill stream to the brook. A big trout, the children knew him well, rolled head and shoulders at some fly that sailed round the bend, while once in just so often the brook took a fraction of an inch against all the wet pebbles, and they watched the slow draw and shiver of a breath of air through the treetops. Then the little voices of the slipping water began again. "It's like the shadows talking, isn't it?" said Una. She had given up trying to read. Dan lay over the bows, trailing his hands in the current. They heard feet on the gravel bar that runs half across the pool, and saw Sir Richard Dallingridge standing over them. "Was yours a dangerous voyage?" he asked, smiling. "She bumped a lot, sir," said Dan. "There's hardly any water this summer." "Ah, the brook was deeper and wider when my children played at Danish pirates. Are you pirate folk?" "Oh, no, we gave up being pirates years ago," explained Una. "We're nearly always explorers now, sailing round the world, you know." "Round?" said Sir Richard. He sat him in the comfortable crotch of an old ash root on the bank. "How can it be round?" "Wasn't it in your books?" Dan suggested. He had been doing geography in his last lesson. "I can neither read nor write," he replied. "Canst thou read, child?" "Yes," said Dan, "barring the very long words." "Wonderful. Read to me that I may hear for myself." Dan flushed, but opened the book and began, gabbling a little, at "The Discoverer of the North Cape." Otyr, the old sea captain who dwelt in Helgoland, to Alfred, lover of truth, brought a snow-white walrus tooth that he held in his right hand. But this I know. This is an old song. This I have heard sung. This is a miracle, Sir Richard interrupted. Nay, do not stop. He leaned forward, and the shadows of the leaves slipped and slid upon his chainmail. I ploughed the land with horses, but my heart was ill at ease, for the old seafaring men came to me now and then with their sagas of the seas. His hand fell on the hilt of the great sword. This is truth, he cried, for so did it happen to me. And he beat time delightedly to the tramp of verse after verse. And now the land, said Otyr, bent southward suddenly, and I followed the curving shore, and ever southward bore into a nameless sea. A nameless sea, he repeated. So did I, so did Hugh and I. Where did you go? Tell us, said Una. Wait, let me hear all first. So Dan read the poem's very end. Good, said the knight. That is Otyr's tale, even as I have heard the men in the Dane ships sing it, not in those same valiant words, but something like to them. Have you ever explored north? Dan shut the book. Nay, my venture was south, farther south than any man has fared. Hugh and I went down with Witta and his heathen. He jerked the tall sword forward and leaned on it with both hands, but his eyes looked long past them. I thought you always lived here, said Una timidly. Yes, while my lady Eluva lived, but she died. She died. Then my eldest son, being a man, I asked de Aquila's leave that he should hold the manor while I went on some journey or pilgrimage to forget. De Aquila, whom the second William had made warden of Pevensey in Earl Mortmain's place, was very old then, but still he rode his tall roan horses, and in the saddle he looked like a little white falcon. Then Hugh at Dallington over yonder heard what I did. He sent for my second son, who, being unmarried, he had ever looked upon as his own child, and by de Aquila's leave gave him the manor of Dallington to hold until he should return. Then Hugh came with me. When did this happen? Said Dan. That I can answer to the very day, for as we rode with de Aquila to Pevensey, have I said that he was lord of Pevensey and of the honour of the Eagle? To the Bordeaux ship that fetched him his wines yearly out of France, a marshman ran to us crying that he had seen a great black goat which bore on his back the body of the king, and that the goat had spoken to him. On that same day, Red William, our king, the conqueror's son, died of a secret arrow while he hunted in the forest. This is a cross matter, said de Aquila, to meet on the threshold of a journey. If Red William be dead, I may have to fight for my lands. Wait a little. My lady being dead, I cared nothing for signs and omens, nor Hugh either. We took that wine ship to go to Bordeaux, but the wind failed us while we were yet in sight of Pevensey. A thick mist hid us, and we drifted with the tide along the cliffs to the west. Our company was, for the most part, merchants returning to France, and we were laden with wool, and there were 3 couple of tall hunting dogs chained to the rail. Their master was a knight of Artois. His name I never learnt, but his shield bore 3 gold pieces on a red ground, and he limped, much as I do, from a wound which he got in his youth at Mantes' siege. He served the Duke of Burgundy against the Moors in Spain, and was returning to that war with his dogs. He sang us strange Moorish songs that first night, and half persuaded us to go with him. I was on pilgrimage to forget, which is what no pilgrimage brings. I think I would have gone, but look you how the life and fortune of man changes. Towards morning a Dane ship, rowing silently, struck against us in the mist, and while we rolled hither and thither and yon, Hugh, leaning over the rail, fell outboard. I leaped after him, and we 2 tumbled aboard the Dane, and were caught and bound ere we could rise. Our own ship was swallowed up in the mist. I judge the knight of the gold pieces muzzled his dogs with his cloak, lest they should give tongue and betray the merchants, for I heard their baying suddenly stop. We lay bound among the benches till morning, when the Danes dragged us to the high deck by the steering place, and their captain, Witta he was called, turned us over with his foot. Bracelets of gold from elbow to armpit he wore, and his red hair was long as a woman's, and came down in plaited locks on his shoulder. He was stout, with bowed legs and long arms. He spoiled us of all we had, but when he laid hand on Hugh's sword and saw the runes on the blade, he hastily thrust it back. Yet his covetousness overcame him, and he tried again and again, and the third time the sword sang loud and angrily, so that the rowers leaned on their oars to listen. Here they all spoke together, screaming like gulls, and a yellow man such as I had never seen came to the high deck and cut our bonds. He was yellow, not from sickness, but by nature, yellow as honey, and his eyes stood endwise in his head. "How do you mean?" said Una, her chin on her hand. "Thus," said Sir Richard. He put a finger to the corner of each eye and pushed it up till his eyes narrowed to slits. "Why, you look just like a Chinaman," cried Dan. "Was the man a Chinaman?" "I know not what that may be. Witta had found him half dead among the ice at the shores of Muscovy. We thought he was a devil. He crawled before us and brought food in a silver dish which these sea-wolves had robbed from some rich abbey, and Witta with his own hands gave us wine. He spoke a little in French, a little in South Saxon, and much in the Northman's tongue. We asked him to set us ashore, promising to pay him better ransom than he would get price if he sold us to the Moors, as once befell a knight of my acquaintance sailing from Flushing. 'Not by my father Guthrum's head,' said he. 'The gods sent ye into my ship for a luck offering.' At this I quaked, for I knew it was still the Danes' custom to sacrifice captives to their gods for fair weather. 'A plague on thy 4 long bones,' said Hugh. 'What profit canst thou make of poor old pilgrims that can neither work nor fight?' 'Gods forbid I should fight against thee, poor pilgrim, with thy singing sword,' he said. 'Come with us and be poor no more. Thy teeth are set far apart, which is a sure sign thou wilt travel and grow rich.' 'What if we will not come?' said Hugh. 'Swim to France or England,' said Witta. 'We are midway between the two. Unless ye choose to drown yourselves, no hair of your head will be harmed here aboard. We think you bring us luck, and I myself know the runes on that sword are good.' He turned and bade them hoist sail. Hereafter all made way for us as we walked about the ship, and the ship was full of wonders. 'What was she like?' said Dan. 'Long, low, and narrow, bearing one mast with a red sail, and rowed by 15 oars a side,' the knight answered. 'At her bows was a deck under which men might lie, and at her stern another shut off by a painted door from the rowers' benches. Here Hugh and I slept with Witta and the yellow man upon tapestries soft as wool. I remember,' he laughed to himself, 'when first we entered there, a loud voice cried out, "Out swords! Out swords! Kill! Kill!" Seeing us start, Witta laughed and showed us it was but a great-beaked grey bird with a red tail. He sat her on his shoulder, and she called for bread and wine hoarsely and prayed him to kiss her. Yet she was no more than a silly bird. But you knew this?' He looked at their smiling faces. 'We weren't laughing at you,' said Una. 'That must have been a parrot. That's just what pollies do.' So we learned later. But here's another marvel. The yellow man, whose name was Kitai, had with him a brown box. In the box was a blue bowl with red marks upon the rim, and within the bowl, hanging from a fine thread, was a piece of iron no thicker than grass stem, and as long maybe as my spur, but straight. In this iron, said Witta, abode an evil spirit which Kitai the yellow man had brought by art magic out of his own country, that lay 3 years' journey southward. The evil spirit strove day and night to return to his country, and therefore, look you, the iron needle pointed continually to the south. 'South?' said Dan suddenly, and put his hand into his pocket. 'With my own eyes I saw it. Every day and all day long, though the ship rolled, though the sun and moon and the stars were hid, this blind spirit in the iron knew whither it would go, and strained to the south. Witta called it the wise iron, because it showed him his way across the unknowable seas.' Again Richard looked keenly at the children. 'How think ye? Was it sorcery?' 'Was it anything like this?' Dan fished out his old brass pocket compass that generally lived with his knife and key ring. 'The glasses got cracked, but the needle waggles all right, sir.' The knight drew a long breath of wonder. 'Yes, yes, the wise iron shook and swung in just this fashion. Now it is still, now it points to the south. North, said Dan. Nay, south. There's the south, said Richard. Then they both laughed, for naturally when one end of a straight compass needle points to the north, the other end must point to the south. Tch, said Sir Richard, clicking his tongue. There can be no sorcery if a child carries it. Wherefore does it point south or north? Father says that nobody knows, said Una. Sir Richard looked relieved. Then it may still be magic. It was magic to us, and so we voyaged. When the wind served, we hoisted sail and lay all up along the windward rail, our shields on our backs to break the spray. When it failed, they rowed with long oars. The yellow man sat by the wise iron, and Witta steered. At first I feared the great white flowering waves, but as I saw how wisely Witta led his ship among them, I grew bolder. Hugh liked it well from the first. My skill is not upon the water, and the rocks and whirlpools such as we saw by the West Isles of France, where an oar caught on a rock and broke, are much against my stomach. We sailed south along a stormy sea, where by moonlight between clouds we saw a Flanders ship roll clean over and sink. Again, though Hugh labored with Witta all night, I lay under the deck with that talking bird, and cared not whether I lived or died. There is a sickness of the sea, which for 3 days is pure death. When we next saw land, Witta said it was Spain, and we stood out to sea. That coast is full of ships busy in the Duke's war against the Moors, and we feared to be hanged by the Duke's men, or sold into slavery by the Moors. So we put into a small harbor which Witta knew. At night men came down with loaded mules, and Witta exchanged amber out of the north against little wedges of iron and packets of beads and earthen pots. The pots he put under the decks, and the wedges of iron he laid on the bottom of the ship, after he had cast out the stones and shingle, which till then had been our ballast. Wine, too, he bought for lumps of sweet-smelling grey amber. A little morsel no bigger than a thumbnail purchased a cask of wine. But I speak like a merchant. No, no, tell us what you had to eat, cried Dan. Meat dried in the sun, and dried fish, and ground beans. Witta took these in, and quartered frails of a certain sweet soft fruit which the Moors use, which is like paste of figs, but with thin long stones. Dates is the name. Now, said Witta, when the ship was loaded, I counsel you strangers, pray to your gods, for from here on our road is no man's road. He and his men killed a black goat for sacrifice on the bows, and the yellow man brought out a small smiling image of dull green stone and burned incense before it. Hugh and I commended ourselves to God and St. Barnabas, and Our Lady of the Assumption, who was specially dear to my lady. We were not young, but I think no shame to say, when as we drove out of that secret harbor at sunrise over a still sea, we too rejoiced and sang as did the knights of old when they followed our great Duke to England. Yet was our leader a heathen pirate, all our proud fleet but one galley perilously overloaded. For guidance we leaned on a pagan sorcerer, and our port was beyond the world's end. Witta told us that his father Guthrum had once in his life rowed along the shores of Africa to land where naked men sold gold for iron and beads. There had he bought much gold and no few elephants' teeth, and thither by help of the wise iron would Witta go. Witta feared nothing except to be poor. My father told me, said Witta, that a great shoal runs 3 days' sail out from that land, and south of the shoal lies a forest which grows in the sea. South and east of the forest my father came to a place where the men hid gold in their hair, but all that country, he said, was full of devils who lived in trees and tore folk limb from limb. How think ye? Gold or no gold, said Hugh, fingering his sword, it is a joyous venture. Have at these devils of thine, Witta. Venture, said Witta sourly. I am only a poor sea thief. I do not set my life adrift on a plank for joy or the venture. Once I beat ship again at Stavanger and feel the wife's arms round my neck, I'll seek no more ventures. A ship is heavier care than a wife or cattle. He leaped down among the rowers, chiding them for their little strength and their great stomachs. Yet Witta was a wolf in a fight, and a very fox in cunning. We were driven south by a storm, and for 3 days and 3 nights he took the stern oar and throttled the longship through the sea. When it rose beyond measure, he brake a pot of whale's oil upon the water, which wonderfully smoothed it, and in that anointed patch he turned her head to the wind, and threw out oars at the end of a rope to make, he said, an anchor at which we lay rolling sorely, but dry. This craft his father Guthrum had shown him. He knew, too, all the leech book of Bald, who was a wise doctor, and he knew the ship book of Hloth the woman who robbed Egypt. He knew all the care of a ship. After the storm, we saw a mountain whose top was covered with snow and pierced the clouds. The grasses under this mountain, boiled and eaten, are a good cure for soreness of the gums and swelled ankles. We lay there 8 days, till men in skins threw stones at us. When the heat increased, Witta spread a cloth on bent sticks above the rowers, for the wind failed between the isle of the mountain and the shore of Africa, which is east of it. That shore is sandy, and we rowed along it within 3 bowshots. Here we saw whales and fish in the shape of shields, but longer than our ship. Some slept, some opened their mouths at us, and some danced on the hot waters. The water was hot to the hand, and the sky was hidden by hot gray mists, out of which blew a fine dust that whitened our hair and beards of a morning. Here, too, were fish that flew in the air like birds. They would fall in the laps of the rowers, and when we went ashore, we would roast and eat them. The knight paused to see if the children doubted him, but they only nodded, and he said, "Go on." The yellow land lay on our left, the great sea on our right. Knight though I was, I pulled my oar amongst the rowers. I caught seaweed and dried it, and stuffed it between the pots of beads, lest they should break. Knighthood is for the land. At sea, look you, a man is but a spurless rider on a bridleless horse. I learned to make strong knots in ropes, yes, and to join 2 ropes end to end, so that even Witta could scarce see where they had been married. But Hugh had 10-fold more sea cunning than I. Witta gave him charge of the rowers on the left side. Thorkild of Borkum, a man with a broken nose that wore a Norman steel cap, had the rowers of the right, and each side rowed and sang against the other. They saw that no man was idle. Truly, as Hugh said, and Witta would laugh at him, a ship is all more care than a manor. How? Thus. There was water to fetch from the shore when we could find it, as well as wild fruit and grasses, and sand for scrubbing of the decks and benches to keep them sweet. Also, we hauled the ship out on low islands and emptied all her gear, even to the iron wedges, and burned off the weed that had grown on her with torches of rush, and smoked below the decks with rushes dampened in salt water, as Hloth the woman orders in her ship book. Once, when we were thus stripped and the ship lay propped on her keel, the bird cried, "Out swords!" as though she saw an enemy. Witta vowed he would wring her neck. Poor Polly, did he? Asked Una. Nay, she was the ship's bird. She would call all the rowers by name. Those were good days for a wifeless man, with Witta and his heathen beyond the world's end. After many weeks, we came to the great shoal, which stretched, as Witta's father had said, far out to sea. We skirted it till we were giddy with the sight and dizzy with the sound of bars and breakers, and when we reached land again, we found a naked black people dwelling among woods, who for 1 wedge of iron loaded us with fruits and grasses and eggs. Witta scratched his head at them in sign he would buy gold. They had no gold, but they understood the sign. All the gold traders hide their gold in their thick hair, for they pointed along the coast. They beat 2 on their chests with their clenched hands, and that, if we had known it, was an evil sign. What did it mean? Said Dan. Patience, he shall hear. We followed the coast eastward 16 days, counting time by sword cuts on the helm rail, till we came to the forest and the sea. Trees grew there out of the mud, arched upon lean and high roots, and many muddy waterways ran all through the darkness under the trees. Here we lost the sun. We followed the winding channels between the trees, and where we could not row, we laid hold of the crusted roots and hauled ourselves along. The water was foul, and great glittering flies tormented us. Morning and evening a blue mist covered the mud, which bred fevers. 4 of our rowers sickened and were bound to their benches, lest they should leap overboard and be eaten by the monsters of the mud. The yellow man lay sick beside the wise iron, rolling his head and talking in his own tongue. Only the bird throve. She sat on Witta's shoulder and screamed in that noisome, silent darkness. Yes, I think it was the silence we feared. He paused to listen to the comfortable home noises of the brook. And we will follow Sir Richard further on the joyous venture next time.